For more than 100 days now, the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie has continued to bother people in a way that feels very different from most cases we normally see. And honestly, when you step back and look at everything surrounding this investigation, it becomes difficult to ignore how unusual the silence has become. An 84-year-old woman reportedly taken from her own home in the middle of the night, from a wealthy area where security cameras, neighbors, and attention should have worked against something like this happening. Yet somehow, according to investigators, there is still no publicly identified suspect, no confirmed vehicle, and no clear explanation that fully connects every piece of this case together. And that detail matters more than people realize. Because normally, in cases involving this much national attention, information begins surfacing over time. Somebody talks. A witness comes forward. A surveillance image leaks. Some investigative direction becomes visible publicly. But here, the silence surrounding this case has remained unusually controlled. And that has led many people to ask a difficult question. Is this case far more dangerous than the public fully understands right now? Hello everyone, and welcome back. Thank you for being here today. I truly appreciate it. This case continues weighing heavily on a lot of people across the country because Nancy Guthrie is not just another headline. She is an elderly woman, a mother, a grandmother, and somebody who should have been safe inside her own home. And I think that emotional reality is exactly why people cannot let this case go. Now, before we go further, I want to say something important. Everything discussed today is analytical and based on publicly available information, reported behavior, and investigative patterns. The exact details remain unclear in several areas of this case, and nobody should be publicly accused without evidence. But when investigators stay this quiet for this long, it naturally causes people to wonder what may be happening behind the scenes. And honestly, that is where this case starts becoming unsettling. Because when you look at the known details, very little about this situation feels emotionally simple. Early on, many people believed this had to be financially motivated. That assumption made sense at first. Nancy Guthrie's connection to a nationally recognized family immediately brought attention, visibility, and speculation surrounding ransom motives. Then reportedly, ransom-style communications surfaced, and naturally people began focusing on the idea of money. But here's what stands out. Financial kidnappings usually follow a certain structure. There is pressure. There is negotiation. There is leverage. The offender wants something concrete, and communication often becomes consistent because money is the goal. But according to publicly released information, this case has never fully settled into that pattern. The communication reportedly felt scattered at times, incomplete, and emotionally unusual. And that raises another difficult question. If money was not the primary motivation, then what was? Because when offenders take enormous risks without clear financial payoff, investigators often begin looking at emotional motives. Control. Resentment. Fear. Retaliation. Obsession. Those possibilities become harder to ignore when the behavior surrounding a crime starts feeling personal rather than transactional. Now here's something else investigators would likely focus on. Why take Nancy at all? If somebody entered that home intending only to burglarize the property, removing an 84-year-old woman from the scene reportedly creates massive additional risk. It increases exposure. It increases time at the location. It increases the chance of witnesses, forensic evidence, and mistakes. Criminals generally try to reduce risk, not multiply it. And that detail keeps pulling many people back toward the possibility that Nancy herself may have represented something emotionally important to the offender. The exact reason remains unclear. But when you step back and look at it from a behavioral perspective, the crime begins feeling less random and more targeted. Not necessarily targeted because of Nancy personally, but possibly because of what she represented to somebody involved. And honestly, that possibility is deeply disturbing. One thing that continues standing out in this case is the porch footage that many people have now watched repeatedly. At first glance, viewers naturally focus on the disguise, the movement, the backpack, and the behavior near the home. But after watching it multiple times, some investigators and analysts reportedly began noticing something else. The movement itself does not always appear calm or polished. At moments, the individual appears awkward, uncertain, even slightly pressured. Now, that does not automatically mean panic. And it certainly does not prove inexperience. But behavior matters during crimes like this. Small physical actions can sometimes reveal emotional stress underneath the surface. The touching of objects. Hesitation near certain areas. Repeated movement patterns. Those details may look insignificant publicly, but investigators often study them carefully because human behavior tends to leak emotion even when somebody is trying to remain controlled. And that's where this case becomes difficult to ignore for many people watching from home. Because if investigators believe they are dealing with somebody emotionally volatile, manipulative, or capable of retaliation, then public silence may actually become part of the investigative strategy itself. Information can become dangerous in cases involving fear and control. Public pressure can become dangerous. Even emotional statements from family members sometimes become carefully measured. Now, I want to be careful with that point because there is a difference between speculation and behavioral analysis. But according to many former investigators who have discussed cases like this over the years, there are situations where law enforcement intentionally limits information because they fear an offender may escalate if they feel cornered or exposed. And honestly, the longer this case continues without major public updates, the more some people begin wondering whether investigators may already understand more than they can safely reveal. That does not mean they know everything. It does not mean an arrest is close. But it may mean the situation behind the scenes is more complicated than the public realizes. I also think many people emotionally connect themselves to Nancy Guthrie because this case touches something deeply personal. Most people look at an elderly woman inside her own home and immediately picture their own mother, grandmother, or elderly neighbor. Home is supposed to feel safe, especially at that stage of life. And when somebody allegedly violates that safety in such a frightening way, people carry that emotionally long after the headlines fade. That is why this case continues staying in people's minds every single day. Before we close today, I want to say this directly. Somewhere tonight, Nancy Guthrie's family is still waking up without answers. They are still waiting, still hoping, and still trying to understand what happened. And no family should ever have to carry that kind of uncertainty for this long. But I also believe visibility matters. Respectful discussion matters. Cases become colder when people stop paying attention. And whether this investigation is moving quietly behind the scenes or not, continuing to keep Nancy's name in the public conversation may matter far more than people realize. And I want to hear your thoughts today. Do you believe investigators know significantly more than what has been publicly released? And do you think the silence surrounding this case may actually be intentional because of the type of offender they believe they are dealing with? As always, please keep the discussion respectful in the comments. And if you appreciate calm, serious conversations surrounding real investigations like this, make sure you subscribe and continue following along. Until next time, continue keeping Nancy Guthrie and her family in your thoughts.